All right, so in this video, I'm going to be covering my Strand weapons. This is a loadout that I set up inside of DIM. I make it applicable to all classes, so whether I'm on Titan, Warlock, or Hunter on any one of those Strand subclasses, I can just equip this DIM loadout, and it's going to have all of the best Strand weapons, generally speaking, available to me, so both in the Kinetic slot and in the heavy slot. And the goal here is to have enough weapons to cover all bases, basically stun champions. We already know what the seasonal artifact is for next season, so I can figure out what weapons to bring in for champs, weapons for burst damage, weapons for crowd control, a shoot to loot weapon, close range burst damage, long range burst damage, like alternatives for boss damage. So stuff like that, right? So this is just an easy way for me to hop on the game and say I'm in the mood to play on the Strand subclass. Generally speaking, I could just equip this DIM loadout on any Strand subclass, and I'll have, I'll have all the weapons that I need, right? You'll notice I keep one slot open here. This is so, say I'm on Titan, well, where's my 1-2 punch shotgun, right? The reason I don't have it in this DIM loadout is because I don't want a 1-2 punch shotgun on my Hunter or my Warlock, but I do on my Titan, so I leave a slot open. So I can just carry over my Swordbreaker or the Ikelos shotgun, for example, and then I can play on Strand and as well as Tractor Cannon, right? If I'm on Hunter, I can throw in Warden's Law and pair it with Lucky Pants. If I'm on Warlock, I can throw in Osteo or Necrochasm or Thorn and play on Necrotic Grips, right? So that's the idea there. Plus, it allows me to collect loot as I play and check that loot out, analyze it, see if I want to delete it or not. So yeah, just a little bit of a flexible spot there. So for the Kinetic slot weapons that I have here for Strand, Quicksilver Storm, obviously. I think it's still the best legendary Strand exotic Strand primary weapon in the game. Even though it's not going to be benefiting from any of the seasonal artifact mods as far as champion stuns or overcharged weapons, it's going to be a little bit less effective than it has been in the last couple seasons. But still, I think it's still going to be the best ad clear Strand gun to use. Can still create tangles, and it's still a very good weapon. So I'm apprehensive to remove it from my loadout personally. The rest of the weapons here are more directly useful for the season, right? So round robin, hand cannons are going to be able to stun overload champions, and the unfortunate thing with Strand is because it's still relatively new as a subclass, we don't have a huge array of weapons available to us. So unfortunately, round robin is a 120 rounds per minute hand cannon. So it's not the best for overload champions, especially with the perks that I have on here. This is more of an ad clear, precision-based weapon. Just snipe red bar heads and create hatchlings. Something I'd probably use more often on Warlock, but still I can get a stun off on an overload, so just good to have there as a backup. And like I said, also good for ad clear in general on Warlock specifically, with the hatchling synergy there with threadlings. So you could use that. You can also use the Waking, I think it's called Waking Vigil from Season of the Witch, which is a 140, so still not as good as a 180 for overloads. Unfortunately, that hand cannon, the 140 from Witch, it doesn't have any good perks, right? So that's the trade-off there. Then we've got anti-barrier pulse rifles, which I'm looking forward to, along with the massive 38% damage buff that pulse rifles are going to be getting in the final shape. So I've got a Relentless here from the Prophecy dungeon. This is the new Prophecy dungeon from the loot refresh. High impact frames are closely aligned with rapid fire frames as far as damage, right? But high impacts are more tailored for ranged damage, whereas rapid fires are more close quarter to mid-range combat focused. And I'm quite happy with the roll that I got here. Plus, the Prophecy weapons are going to be enhanceable in the final shape according to Bungie, so I can put enhanced keep away, enhanced hatchling. So that's pretty nice perk combo there. But again, it's just for the utility of breaking barrier shields. Then I've got a synchronic roulette, and if you're a PvP player, I know you're probably going to have an adept immortal in there somewhere. I don't play PvP in this game, so I don't have one. So synchronic roulette is my only option. I think there might be a new Strand SMG coming. I think a 900 RPM as well, or maybe a 720. I can't remember. But yeah, we're going to be getting a new SMG in the final shape, so I'll probably end up replacing synchronic roulette because this SMG is just not that good. 600 RPM SMGs, generally speaking, aren't that good. I mean, but it's not horrible, right? I've got hatchling on there to synergize with certain Strand builds, do a little bit of extra ad clear, pulse monitor for some automatic reloads occasionally, and then nanotech tracer rockets it's a great origin perk. Actually, it's one of my favorite origin perks. It's just the weapon does not feel very good. That's the one downside. Then I've got a sniper. So as with my other subclass videos, I recommend that you bring at least one sniper for every element. So if I'm on Strand, I'm going to bring Neem's Lance, and this is kind of an interesting role to me, and it's not necessarily applicable in very many cases, but nonetheless, it still is a sniper. So if I need to accomplish something at long range, precision based with a sniper, I could still do that. And if it happens to be a vehicle or a construct, then deconstruct is doing a massive 40% damage buff, right? Which is just crazy. And plus the synergy here between reconstruction and deconstruct is pretty interesting. Reconstruction passively reloading and overflowing the magazine, while deconstruct actively reloading the magazine as I do damage. So this would be very good if we get like a like against Briggs or something, thinking of 0 hour right now. Any vehicles or constructs where you need to do sustained damage with a special weapon, this is a very good weapon to do that. Also, Sundering is going to be an overcharged option in the seasonal artifact next season, so regardless of the activity, or the champions I should say, as long as overcharged weapons is a modifier, this weapon's going to do 25% more damage because it has this origin trait, right? So that's pretty good there. And then for my special ammo burst option for close to mid-range, so where Neem's Lance is serving the long-range precision, Scatter Signal is serving close to mid-range burst damage, non-precision. We all know how good Scatter Signal is. Not much need to really explain there. I've got two rolls, one with Slice and one with Overflow, right? I have Enhanced Overflow on my other one. Generally speaking, though, I found that it's extremely rare where I'm shooting 15 shots in a row to totally maximize control burst. Like if you're pairing this with Dragon's Breath, you're only going to shoot like 3 shots and then you're going to swap to Dragon's Breath. So you're only getting 2 controlled burst shots every now and then. If you're doing a damage rotation with like Dragon's Breath. So I think Overflow is a little bit overrated, and used far less than people think it's actually used, right? So whereas Slice can actually provide a 40% debuff to an enemy, and darkness debuffs are going to be very valuable in Prismatic as well. But I'm talking about just the Strand subclass here, so that's not really a factor. But still, Slice, Sever, 40%, it basically gives you 40% damage resistance from select targets. It's very useful, right? More useful than Overflow and more applicable in more situations. So then again, because of Sundering here, I'm using a combat bow. Bows aren't benefiting from any anti-champion stuns in the next season, which is a little bit unfortunate because bows are my favorite weapons. But nonetheless, I can overcharge it with the seasonal artifact and still get 25% extra weapon damage, so that's pretty good, thanks to Sundering again. And then Hatchling and Explosive Head is a decent combination. I'm still waiting on that Archer's Tempo with Hatchling, so that I can just slay out with this thing a little faster, plus Explosive Head kind of works in conflict with precision kills at times, right? Like if the explosive damage gets the kill, then you're not going to make a thread lane because it's not going to count as a precision kill. But still, Explosive Head is just a static buff all around to damage range and area AoE. So I mean, Explosive Head is never bad to have. It's just that Hatchling is just kind of more of a unreliable bonus that I can sometimes get to proc. Yeah, so then Wishkeeper, I mean, it's an exotic, right? So like Quicksilver Storm, it's not benefiting from the seasonal artifact, but I can still intrinsically, essentially, stun unstoppable champions. I can lock down lanes, suspend all kinds of enemies, do crowd control, and it's an exotic, so it does pretty good damage, extremely useful in certain situations. So I think Wishkeeper and Quicksilver are, generally speaking, the best two exotic primary weapons for Strand. So I'm going to take that with me for most of my builds where, basically every Strand build has a suspend option where you can build into suspend or enhance it somehow. So Wishkeeper can come in handy on any build. Then I've got a Fang of Your Ute here with shoot to loot. So as I recommend like carrying a sniper and a fusion on basically every loadout, I also recommend a shoot to loot weapon. So that way you can pick up armor charge and ammo from long range. So that's kind of nice. This is also a lightweight, so it'd be very good on Hunter, giving you an extra 50 mobility. And Hatchling again to synergize with Threadling builds, but it's more so just to have a shoot to loot option. And Scout Rifles are able to stun unstoppable champions alongside sidearms. So you'll notice here that I don't have any sidearms. I think sidearms are probably just a horrible unstoppable weapon in general, especially if you got to aim down sight, like do a box breathing style of proc to get the unstoppable round. It's a little weird, right? Because you got to use a sidearm at close range. So unstoppables, just they're generally speaking not the best champion to be trying to stun at close range. You want to stun them when they're further away or when you're around a corner. So I think sidearms aren't going to be super good for unstops, unfortunately. Scout rifles, however, will be. So then on to the heavy slot here. I've got a Caraxes' Distress. I've got a couple of these, but generally speaking, I mostly use Envious Assassin and Surrounded. You can also go Reconstruction and Surrounded. Surrounded, sometimes pretty niche to proc, or pretty situational, I should say. But when you can get it to proc, this thing does an absolute ton of damage. Like it's right up there with Bait and Switch on an adaptive frame. So very good. Plus having Harmonic Resonance, you get the option to do a little bit of extra damage to Tormentors and Lucent Hive, and also extra damage in general if you pair it with other Harmonic Resonance weapons. So that's kind of cool. It's also a very cool looking weapon, right? So yeah, it's a prized weapon of mine. Then Semiotician, because you got to have a rocket launcher, of course, and it's the only Strand rocket that we have outside of Crowning Duologue, which I don't typically do the festivities all that much, so I don't even have a Crowning Duologue. But if you do have one that's got a good roll, you can bring that. High impact frames are generally good for total damage, right? You can use it for ad clear, bursting down majors. It's they're not the best for raid, like for dungeon and raid bosses. You want to use an aggressive and adaptive there, but we don't have one for Strand, so this is the next best thing. Field Prep and Bipod, this is just to double down on the total ammo, right? Because high impacts have more ammo than aggressives and adaptives, and then Field Prep is going to give you more ammo, and Bipod is going to, give you more ammo as well, and allows you to have 2 shots in the magazine at all times. So you can have like 15 to 17 rockets with this thing, or something crazy like that, especially if you got somebody in your fire team using Gallahorn, you got Wolfpack rounds. Every rocket is going to have Wolfpack rounds. That's a lot of rockets, so that's it's a good rocket launcher. Then for machine gun, I recommend you bring a machine gun on every loadout, and I used to carry Circular Logic around with me all the time on my Strand builds, but Mercado 45 has basically replaced my Circular Logics. Not that I've deleted them, but this thing rolls, unlike Circular Logic where Demolitionist rolls in the right column. We've got Demo in the third column, which means we can pair it with a damage perk like Surrounded, which is really nice. If you're on a Strand Suspend build, it's very easy to get surrounded and control the enemies around you to remain surrounded. But there's other perks that you can combine here as well. I like Demolitionist. It's just one of my favorite perks in general. It's an automatic reload if I need to. It gives me grenade energy. So yeah, I use this a whole lot. Then I've got a Dragon Cult sickle here. You can also use the one from Season of the Deep, the Vortex frame. We do have Overload swords, so I think it's kind of nice that, I mean, because the one problem with Overload swords is you got to go up to the Overload and stun them, right? Which can be risky, kind of like sidearms are to unstoppables. You know, just generally not a good idea. But with a caster frame, I can stun overloads from long range, so that's kind of cool. I also use this weapon in like the Abyss encounter in Crota's End. So there's, I mean, there's certain encounters where swords are useful just for skating around for mobility, and then Tireless Blade and Hatchling is just for very good ammo economy and refunds, and then the Hatchling just to getting those threadlings going around and doing work for you as you're progressing through an encounter is just passive ad clear that really works in your favor. So I've actually got the exact same roll on the Vortex frame from Season of the Deep. So there's that. Then I've got a Slammer as well, and this is mainly for the utility of Eager Edge. And you may notice here, well, like where's all my Strand weapons, right? Well, we only have so many Strand weapons. So what are you gonna do? So I'm gonna instead of just using a bunch of duplicates of Strand weapons, I'll just pick some of the best and or most useful other heavy weapons in the game that I can combine with my elemental slot, right? Because it's just until we get more Strand weapons, that's how it's got to be. So Slammer, it's good for Eager Edge. Having Cold Steel is an instant stun on overloads. It can also build up enough slow stacks to stun an unstoppable through a freeze and shatter. So that's kind of nice there. But I mainly had it on here for the utility. But yeah, so even if it didn't have Cold Steel, it's kind of nice that this season we can stun overloads with it. Dragon's Breath, just because it's pretty much one of the best heavy weapons in the game for passive damage, for doing damage rotations, total ammo, ad clear, everything. If I need to sword a boss and stay alive, Lament is still the best sword for it. Even if there's other swords that technically can do a little bit more damage, I think Lament is still the safer choice all around, so I can use that. Then I've got an Edge Transit here with Cascade. Oh, I guess I forgot that I have a couple different shinies here. So in my Void video, I didn't even have this on. I had auto loading and field prep with bait and switch. But yeah, like if you really want to do the maximum amount of damage, especially if you're solo and there's no wolf pack rounds or anything like that, if you have a boss that can be hit with a heavy grenade launcher consistently, then Edge Transit's going to be the best weapon for it. This is technically the highest damage combo, if only I had spike grenades, but Cascade Point is going to boost your DPS massively as long as you can proc it first with a couple precision hits, and then bait and switch for a 30% extra damage to your total damage, right, on a 10-second timer. Enhanceable up to 11 seconds. So plus I can work this into a rotation, right, because bait and switch does favor damage rotations at least every 10 seconds. Same with Cascade Point, so I can pair that with like Wilder Flight or Tessellation or something like that. Then I've got the best rocket launch, legendary rocket launcher in the game, I should say, for DPS and total damage, which is Crux Termination with Clown Cartridge to enhance that DPS, eliminate those reloads, and Explosive Light for 25% damage per rocket. So yeah, I've got some good damage options there. And then for the elemental slot, so this is kind of a weird one with the darkness subclasses, which I kind of wish Bungie would address in some way, because I find it's just weird compared to playing a light subclass where you have kinetic weapons in this slot here, and then so you can run a kinetic with like 2 solar weapons, 2 light weapons. Whereas with Strand, you can't. You can only run 2 Strand weapons with another elemental weapon. You can't run 2 Strand weapons with a kinetic weapon because of this weird rule where kinetic weapons are locked to this slot along with the darkness weapons. So yeah, so this makes for like a little bit of extra thinking involved. Like if you don't want to, you have to pick different elements, right? So my theory here is just pick the best elemental weapons, basically, right? And I aim to use this same setup of elemental weapons on Stasis and Strand. So in the Strand video, I might not talk about this because I'm talking about it here. But yeah, Indebted Kindness, best sidearm, very good ammo economy, can stun overload champions with Volt Shot, can stun unstoppable champions through the artifact mod in the final shape. Le Monarch, because again, stuns overloads, and especially on the Strand subclass where you don't have an overload option intrinsically with the subclass. It's pretty important to have some good overload options there. Tessellation is good on Stasis and Strand, right? Well, it's good on any subclass, but especially Stasis and Strand, because that allows you to run triple elemental weapons, right? You can have Strand, right? Because as long as you've got Tessellation, it just matches the weapon to whatever subclass you're on, right? Plus, it gives you that kind of Izanagi's Burden honed edge style of burst shot. Like you can preload your grenade in there like long before you enter a damage phase versus a boss, and immediately shoot off that irreducible shot for a large amount of burst damage, and then work in your other weapons for your damage rotation, all while benefiting from like triple matching surges, right? You can have triple Strand surges, and all three of your weapons are going to do 22% more damage as opposed to just one or two of them. Then Forbearance, just because it's basically the best ad clear weapon in the game. Things might change come the final shape with the nerf to chain reaction and the changes to wave frames in general. However, I think it's still going to be the most survivable wave frame, which is also important to me with Unrelenting and Soul Drinker, especially where sometimes on Strand loadouts you might not have a lot of survivability. Like if you don't have your Woven Mail up, healing can sometimes be an issue. So it's pretty good to have a good solid weapon to give you heals. So that's the thinking there. Then Wilderflight, because it's basically the best elemental weapon for utility as far as blinding, right? So I can do crowd control with Wilderflight on Stasis or Strand. And I can also work this into a damage rotation. Like I said, with Edge Transit, I can switch to Spike before damage. With Vorpal, doing 15% more damage to bosses and auto reloading. Yeah, very nice. Top tier grenade launcher. Then I've got an Ikelos Sniper, just because I think, personal preference maybe, it's the best rapid fire sniper in the game, generally speaking, and I can work this into a damage rotation with something like Dragon's Breath, right? So if I wanted to go solar and try and be efficient with like solar surges and reserves and stuff like that, I could run a sniper in Dragon's Breath. Or Ariana's Vow, for that matter. Well, not with Dragon's Breath, but Ariana's Vow is... It's a good weapon that I like to use on Strand and Stasis subclasses at times. Just because if I'm already using like a good Strand primary weapon or Stasis, then it's just a good special ammo option that acts like a sniper that also pierces barrier shields. Plus, Ariana's Vow, I think I just remembered, is actually getting a buff, I think, in the final shape, so that your precision kills are going to cause ignitions or something like that. So, I mean, I don't think it's going to one-shot barriers, unfortunately, which I wish they would make it so it did. So it'd be on, like, why does Wish Ender, a primary weapon, one-shot barrier shields, but a special weapon like Ariana's can't? That I still don't really understand that. But either way, I often use this on my Strand builds, so it's a barrier option, which is good. And then Sunshot, just because, I mean, Sunshot's always useful. So like, for example, if I'm using, actually I might have the build right here. If I'm using my Synthos build for my Banner of War, right, and then I might be using Swordbreaker, right, so to proc my 1-2 punches, then I can pair it with an ad clear primary weapon like Sunshot, right, or Le Monarch, but still Sunshot's just top tier weapon, and it's going to be able to take care of overload champions once again, right? So that's the idea there. Then I've got a Staccato 46 because it's shoot to loot, because it stuns unstoppables as well, being a scout rifle. So just more for utility there for champs and picking up armor charge from long range and bricks of ammo. So that's it for this video. I'll see you in the stasis one next.